Kherson may be the most dangerous regional center in Ukraine. Occupied by Russian forces in 2022, its residents were subjected to torture and intimidation. The city was liberated by Ukrainian forces in November 2022, but almost immediately came under daily bombardment and shelling from Russian troops stationed just across the Dnipro River. In June 2023, Kherson was hit by a catastrophic flood caused by the destruction of the Kakhovka Hydroelectric Power Plant, an explosion orchestrated by the Russian military. Today, the city's residents are hunted by Russian drones as if caught in some macabre human safari. Kherson Human Safari is the title of a documentary film by Zarina Zabrisky, an American filmmaker who has spent significant time in Kherson reporting from this brave and embattled city. As someone who also travels regularly to Kherson, I had much to discuss with Zarina, so I invited her to the Explain Ukraine podcast. You'll find a link to her film in the episode description. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm a Ukrainian philosopher, editor-in-chief of UkraineWorld and president of PEN Ukraine. Explain Ukraine is produced by UkraineWorld, an English-language media project about Ukraine run by Internet Ukraine. Before we begin, a quick reminder, you can support our work on Patreon. Your support is essential. We rely heavily on crowdfunding. You can also help us fund our regular volunteer trips to frontline areas in Ukraine, including Kherson, where we support both civilians and soldiers. Donations are welcome via PayPal. All links are in the episode description. So let's begin. Zarina Zabrisky, welcome to this podcast.
Hi, Volodymyr. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much for agreeing to talk. And I would like to talk about your film, which is called Kherson Human Safari. And it's really a very, very good film, good movie, documentary film. Really advise our listeners to watch it. You can find the link in the description of this podcast. So it's the reality of Kherson right now. Can you tell me first to our listeners what Kherson is, why it is so important to know about the life of this city?
A great question and a great way to start this conversation, Volodymyr, because not everybody in the West has heard about Kherson. Most people have heard Kiev, Odessa, Kharkov, Lviv. Kherson is an incredibly important from many points of view. Strategically, it's a great point on the map, and everybody is interested in it. Putin needed it in the beginning of the full-scale invasion because his plan was to capture Kherson, move on immediately to the seaports of Mykolaiv and Odessa, and from there to keep going towards Transnistria, Moldova, towards EU, actually, and NATO countries. Economically, Kherson is important for many reasons. It's very rich agriculturally in area, and also it has the control of water supplies to the Crimea Peninsula. For the Ukrainian military, Kherson is equally important because of its proximity to the Crimea Peninsula and moving on across the Dnipro River and pushing the Russian military would give a chance to return Crimea back to Ukraine. So for that, and also symbolic value of Kherson, its history, and we can touch upon it, the Russian narratives of imperial history of Kherson. All of this counts in and puts Kherson on the map. And so Kherson was the first regional center captured by the Russian military, and also the only one that later in 9 months was liberated by Ukrainians. And the Russian military were pushed, as I have mentioned, across the Dnipro River, and they are in very close proximity to the city and Ukrainian-controlled Kherson Oblast or Kherson region.
And indeed, for our listeners, I can tell you that it's it's probably the most dangerous, one of the most dangerous cities in Ukraine right now to be and to live. And therefore, Zarina, really big respect for making this film and for coming back to Kherson. We also travel to Kherson quite often, and I can tell to our listeners that it is really challenging because the Russians are on the other side of the Dnipro River, and at some places of Kherson, like the district Ostriv, which means island, Russians are just 2 kilometers away. In some other districts, they are probably 5 kilometers away. And the Dnipro River is about 1 kilometer or 800 meters. And Zarina, actually, you tell the story, and you talk to people in your film who are describing this situation. So, can you tell me a little bit about everyday life in Kherson right now? Because from my experience, it's basically you cannot be on the streets close to the river after afternoon, after 2 o'clock, for example. The streets are mostly empty. Is this your experience as well?
Yes and no. There is this belief among the remaining population of Kherson that the later in the day you go out, the more risky it becomes. In my personal experience, it's pretty much the same. The Russians are attacking Kherson around the clock. They're attacking it in the morning, they're attacking it in the afternoon, and they're attacking it in the evening and at night. So it's really a matter of luck. But it is true that most businesses are still operating there, and there are very few in the central Kherson and practically none in the coastal Kherson, say in Ostrov, where that's the whole different story. Not everybody can get to Ostrov. For instance, the journalists are not allowed to go there unless we obtain a special permit. But the areas close to the river, you can go there on your own risk. And there are certain areas where you also are not advised to go by the military, by the press officers to whom we report as journalists. But I have friends who live by the river, and I know from talking to them every day, whether I'm in Kherson or whether I'm not there, that it's about the same risk. Now, when you come and visit Kherson, you see that the streets are almost empty, and it's true. But as one of our main characters, or the people featured in the film, says, life is underground these days in Kherson. It's very rich. There's a lot going on, anything from poetry readings and embroidery master classes to theater premieres and museums. It all exists. But you have to know how to find it. It's all the word of mouth, because it's very hard to make any public announcements. The Russians are monitoring all the information space and channels connected with Kherson. And if there any conglomeration anywhere or any group of people in Kherson, we know it will be targeted. So it's very surreal. But life is there, and I'm returning back fairly soon to report more.
Indeed, I know that Khersonians, when you tell them, look, the streets are empty and it is a ghost town, they disagree very strongly, and they say, look, we just try not to walk on the streets too often. We stay in our houses because it feels more protected. Those people who visited Kherson after the full scale invasion, after the liberation, know that even the bus stops are equipped as a kind of bomb shelters. And I can tell you that we travel to Kherson from time to time, and we organize at Pan Ukraine, we organized poetry meetings as well. And the most recent was trip was in late April, and we organized an event in the childhood library for children in Kherson. We brought two Ukrainian children writers, and we organized the music and poetry readings also in a library, very very well equipped. for these events, which I was very surprised, and where I actually get acquainted with the musician that is one of the characters of your film. So it's indeed amazing how the cultural life continues in Kherson, and thank you for stressing this. So who are the people who stay in Kherson? Because I feel lots of admiration for them, because many people whom I met are really very strong, but at the same time very humane. How would you describe those people who stay?
Well, exactly that. I feel the same. I feel like I'm very inspired and moved by people who live in Kherson, a very strong community, but also, like you said, very humane. Boris Hoida, the composer you have mentioned, for instance, used to be a resistance fighter, partisan during the occupation, but at the same time, he composed the music that is the main theme in our film, and he's just one of many. And indeed, I was in Kherson in April, but my social schedule gets so busy on the weekend with events you can attend that actually I haven't heard of your event, but the libraries are there. Many are destroyed or being destroyed. The children library, one of the children's library, one of the best ones in Ukraine, was
Dniprova
uh,
Chayka. Yeah.
yeah, was destroyed before, but there are more that are still open. The main library, the library of named after Gonchar, right by the river, is in terrible condition. It's been hit by tanks and by aerial bombs, and then was set on fire many times. And it's really a very painful sight. Not that you can get there freely, it's very dangerous to go there. But other libraries, especially further away from the coastal areas, are open. And people who live there, they still maintain their daily life and their rich life. The people of Kherson, I always tell, my personal belief that partially their strengths are in their athleticism. They are very athletic there. If you look at the news, overall news for Ukraine, you'll see that Khersonian athletes are leading in a lot of disciplines. They win a lot of gold and silver for Ukraine, and remarkably, gyms and what kind of like dance studios, boxing rings are still open in Kherson. And I've been attending a lot of them and filming there, but also taking classes. And you see kids and retired people actually in the park at the little like sports equipped playgrounds, working out to the sounds of sirens and explosions. There's a park next to my building, and I see these people there doing their morning exercise all the time. And I think it's a part of their stoicism and their strengths. Their book clubs, their chess clubs. What's missing are the jobs. So it's very difficult to survive because a lot of businesses have closed for obvious reasons, and a lot of buildings are destroyed and are being destroyed. So it's hard from the logistics point of view, but people are there, the stores are open, and some stores, the produce stores are beautiful. When you go in, the displays are like in the best stores in the world. I'm right now visiting back home in the States, and we have the Whole Foods here, and I believe that our central store in Kherson looks better than the most posh Whole Foods we have around here.
Indeed, I'm also always surprised with the way how in cities like Kharkiv and Kherson, who are constantly bombed and who are very close to the enemy troops, to the Russian troops, the supply of food is so amazing, and you can find all sorts of food, even the exotic food. Thank you for mentioning this Honchar library. Have very personal memories with it because the first time we visited it, it was shelled already, but still more or less. At least we could enter the building. It was December 22, so 1 month after the liberation, and we were there with Victoria Amelina, our writer who later was killed in Kramatorsk in 23. So I still have the videos of her going to the window, and the window are looking at the Dnipro River, and everybody telling her not to go to the window because the Russian snipers are on the other side of the Dnipro River, and she would, she would tell us, okay guys, I would go to the window. So we were joking very much at that time. And the second time we came close to this library, it was after this horrible shelling, and it was completely empty. We of course couldn't enter, and I think Victoria already by that time, she was already dead. So it's a very very personal connection. Tell me more about your film, because your film tells all kind of stories. Your film tells a story of occupation, of torture, of resistance, of how Ukrainians went without arms to stop the Russian tanks, the story of occupation, the story of liberation. And it's indeed, there are lots of documentary footages. There are lots of footages from the real events, I guess, taken from the phones. So tell me the story of this film and why you called it Human Safari.
Right. First of all, I just wanted to comment on your memories of Victoria Melina. I have not met her in person, but I know her work, and it was a terrible blow to know that she was injured and later passed away in Kramatorsk in Rio Pizzeria. I'm very familiar with that place, and she actually was there with some colleagues at the time when she was injured. So that's a very poignant memory indeed. And it was very dangerous to be, and it still is for different reasons. The snipers are not on the other side of the Dnipro River anymore because the Russians were pushed further away. But now we have the drones, and here we have the connection to your question and to Human Safari. So the idea of the film is to tell the whole story of Kherson up to date. And it's a story that is still being written, the story that is still ongoing in real time. And that's why the film has the urgency that it does. It's not a memoir, it's not a look back at the past, it's not an attempt to analyze what had happened, although all of this is definitely important. It's more a cry out for help, it's cry out to save Kherson to the global community. I'm talking to you from Washington, D.C. at the moment, where I'm having meetings with decision makers and people who actually have the power to take these decisions that still can save this city, because the condition right now is critical. And the film is showing everything that happened up to date from the start of the full-scale invasion, from the 24th of February of 2022. And we followed, my crew and we followed a lot of people, about 8 main characters, but also pretty much anyone in Kherson, the residents of Kherson, and not just people, but also the animals, the trees, the nature of Kherson, the streets, the buildings, the whole city of Kherson, as it went through first invasion and protests, occupation, liberation, then flood, and almost 3 years of shelling nonstop. And the last chapter, human safari. So for those of you in the West who's listening and is not familiar with this terrible term, chilling term, human safari, this is the newest war crime and the crime against humanity as recognized by the United Nations and the Human Rights Watch. In June, actually at the end of May and the beginning of June of 2025, there were two important reports published, and one by the United Nations Human Rights Committee and the other one by Human Rights Watch. And both, after conducting their own investigations on the ground, have come to the conclusion that these are indeed war crimes and crimes against humanity. They have the lists of all the crimes. I believe there are up to 6 or 9 different various crimes in accordance with the definitions of the international laws that are mentioned in those reports. These committees, these teams arrived to Kherson and did their investigations in late winter, spring of 2025. And that was about 6 months since I actually discovered this horrifying crime. I first noticed that the FPV drones, Mavic drones, were attacking civilians in the street of Kherson in en masse in July 2024. And I started to interview survivors, interview the relatives of the victims, and collect all the evidence. And the first article about human safari appeared in the newspaper I write for, Byline Times. It's a British newspaper, on the 29th of July 2025. So it's exactly a year ago. And then Euromaidan Press, which is a Ukrainian English language newspaper, published my article. I write for them as well. And after that, it took me a few months to convince other publications and other editors that such a horrific crime indeed possible. And I even had to consult psychologists to understand why is that people do not believe me and do not believe Khersonians. And I was explained by several psychologists that these are psychological defenses. And when we are dealing with the atrocities and the crimes that terrifying, we adapt and we put up the psychological defense to protect our psyche from injury, from moral injury. And disbelief is a psychological defense. So by October, I was able to convince several editors with the evidence that this is going on. And from then on, we had about 130 publications in different major newspapers and TV channels around the world. All the major media outlets published and did reports on human safari, from Forbes and Washington Post to New York Times and The Guardian, you name it. And still it's not general knowledge. Still people just can't get this idea accepted because it's just that horrible, Volodymyr.
So, indeed, by human safari, you understand actually the hunting civilians just to make fun, killing them maybe to train or just as in a computer game. Is that correct?
Well, it's a little bit more complex than that. This element is certainly there because the Russian military themselves and the Russian Telegram channel close to the Russian military are consistently publishing videos taken by the drones, by the camera that is installed on a FPV drone or Mavic drone, showing the moments of such hunts when a drone is following civilians down the street. It could be a pedestrian, it could be a bicyclist, there could be taxi drivers, could be ambulances, it could be the first responders a lot. And actually, they set these videos to the all kind of pop music, techno music, rap, with very offensive sometimes lyrics, sadistic videos indeed. And so that can give us a right to say that they're doing it for fun. But both United Nations team and the Human Rights Watch and I as well, we believe that it's done for way more serious reasons than just fun. For instance, this is a strategy of forced displacement, which is also, by the way, a crime against humanity. And this is meant to instill fear. It's a terror campaign. And these videos are often accompanied by threats and by advice for the civilians to move away from Kherson. And unfortunately, many districts, many neighborhoods by the river are now almost abandoned because it's impossible to live there. And just hunting civilians down the street is not the only thing that these drones are doing. They also drop incendiary mixtures, devices, sometimes industrial made and sometimes just homemade, sort of like Molotov cocktail type. Drones drop them on residential houses, on the residential blocks. Right now in summer, that's the second summer, when they're dropping incendiary mixtures on the dry grass patches, setting the whole fields on fire. While they do that, they also break down the water supply, the critical infrastructure and energy infrastructure. So there's no way for the residents to put out the fire, to extinguish the fire. And the fire engines have very hard time arriving there because the Russian military are watching for them and attack them either by the drone in a double tap move or by artillery. And I filmed many instances like this when I'm there to film and the first responders are there to put out the fire, to help the injured, but we all have to hide under the bushes or in the trees or somewhere because the drones are there to attack. And in addition, the drones are doing remote mining by dropping anti-infantry mines. They're called lipistki, or petals, and they're small mines, anti-infantry. They're banned by many conventions. And if you don't see it and you step on it, you lose your limbs, and occasionally it can kill you. And the Russians are disguising these mines as trash, as rocks sometimes, so it's hard to spot them. And I recently had an article published in Euromaidan Press about sapper Volodymyr Pepelitsa, who lost a limb because he had to choose between hiding from a drone and risking to step on the mine. And he decided that he will hide, and he stepped on the mine and he lost his leg.
Indeed, I can tell you that I also noticed these practices of human safari in other parts of this war, in particular in cities like Nikopol, which are also facing the enemy just in front of the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, the biggest power plant in Europe, and occupied by the Russians. And there, Russians are basically located on the nuclear power plant and used this nuclear power plant as a shield against Ukrainian strikes. But they also have it as a kind of a training school for their drone pilots, and as a training targets, they use even public transportation buses in Nikopol or civilians. And I would ask you to reflect upon it, because I truly agree with you that the goal is actually to intimidate civilians. The goal is to force them to leave. And I think this was the primary goal of the massive missile attacks that we experienced from the early stages of this full scale invasion. I remember even writing on Twitter as early as probably February 2022 that the goal of these missile strikes is the deportation by missiles. So, using missiles to deport, to displace forcefully people, but not physically taking them, but inciting them to leave. So, what exactly do you think Russians want through with this cruelty? They're using this cruelty as a management tool, as a something, as an instrument to achieve certain goals. Is that the that Ukrainians leave their lands? Is that Ukrainians just are intimidated, have fear, and want to surrender? What do you think is that, and how important for the Russian army is just using the cruelty against civilians as an instrument of war?
That is exactly correct. And I can 100% confirm what you just thought about Nikopol. I did go to Nikopol to report as well. And Nikopol is as much under drone attacks, drone attack, as Kherson. And in some instances, it's even more horrifying because there were reports of drones flying inside the windows, and it's fairly rare in Kherson. I've recorded a couple of instances like this, but I think it was more represented in Nikopol. And Nikopol is a much smaller place, and it's completely underreported because it's very hard to get there, maybe because of the proximity to Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. I'm not sure, but it certainly needs to be covered more. And I wrote about it, and I plan to report more about Nikopol. And to answer your question, it is definitely a part of the bigger strategy of scorched earth, where Russia, in this case, so it could be any country aggressor, the army of the aggressor, destroys all the critical resources. So the army and population of the adversary has no bases, no resources, and eventually has to abandon the place. And say in the case of Kherson, if say the residents, the civilian populations of Kherson, which at this moment we believe is about 60,000. It's hard to tell, but this about the last number I got from the authorities there. Move away and leave, abandon Kherson. It would be much easier for the Russian military to either completely erase the city and turn it into another Bakhmut or Avdiivka or Marivka. We have a lot of examples of such places that are no more, right, like Volnovakha and so forth. And that's why they are using all resources in their arsenal, and instilling fear is one of them. And it's much easier to push people away by terrorizing them than by actually trying to physically capture Kherson. We have to remember that Kherson has a very different geographical situation than, say, Sumy region, where the Russian military are moving forward on the land, and they just have to capture the land. In case of Kherson, there's the Dnipro River that is separating the Ukrainian controlled side and the Russian controlled side. And there are islands, there are isles, and it's very, very difficult to cross the river by day or by night. And there are attempts to cross the Dnipro River happening all the time. And the Ukrainian military there, the brigades defending Kherson, putting up heroic efforts, preventing the Russian troops from moving on to Kherson. And I've been told by both the head of Kherson military administration and by other military that the Dnipro River is teeming with the Russian bodies. Forgive me for being graphic, but that's the case. There's a lot of Russian soldiers being killed trying to capture Kherson. So it's easier for them to use fear, to use terror, to push the residents away, bomb out the remaining Kherson, and then push the Ukrainian troops away and recapture it.
Let me also ask you about the environment, the environmental issues, because this is also one of the big topics, of course, of Kherson, of your film. It's the flood, it's the explosion of the Kakhovka Dam, Kakhovka Hydro Power Plant, and it also connects, interestingly, these two cities that we talked about, because Kherson, after the explosion of the Kakhovka Dam, Kherson was flooded, and in certain districts of Kherson, the water was up until the second floor. I mean, the districts like Korobel. I didn't visit it during the flood, but I visited it after, and I was so impressed to see still lines where the water has been during this flood. Instead, as Nikopol is higher than Kakhovka plant, in Nikopol, which is a place of a big artificial water reservoir to aim to cool the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, it's the complete opposite. It's basically the water that has been there disappeared, and just the whole, the huge amount of water disappeared. And one might say that this is return of the old ecosystem of the Ukrainian Cossack steppe ecosystem with absolutely different type of environment. But this case shows us how Russians are also doing the ecocide, both by flooding the cities and the territories, and both by removing the water from the places that when the water has been. Tell me a little bit about this as well.
Well, exactly. It's ecocide, and it's also a part of the scorched earth strategy, and it fits into the strategy perfectly. And this is the whole other topic, and I feel it's very rich, needs to be covered, needs to be explored. I'm looking forward to reading the book by Ukrainian author and now military Yevgen Lear called The Flood. I heard some really good things about this book, so it probably will tell us more about it. The amount of almost like biblical scale events that happened to Kherson prevented me from going in depth on as much as I wanted to, say, on the flood. And I hope to do this now that the film is done and I'm coming back, and I'll be working on the book and more reports, articles, and definitely the flood and the aftermath of the flood and the whole re-emerging steps and the great Luch, right, the Veliki Luch, coming back. This is very, very interesting and needs to be covered more in detail. But what we were able to get covered in the film is also pretty unknown, because I was lucky enough to speak to Father Nicodemus, a priest who used to work on the left bank of the Dnipro, which is now occupied in Aleshki, and he was still there during the flood. And this priest was performing funerary services for those killed by the flood, those deceased. And I believe that probably for the first time when we made public his evidence and his eyewitness stories. And we will discover later that there are many, many more people killed by the flood than the numbers that we have now, partially because the Russians are not sharing publicly the numbers, also because they were preventing the rescuers from providing help to those who suffered and those who lost their residences, and also partially because they falsified the death certificates, and they were registering those killed by the flood as people just deceased, or gone from various health issues and so forth. And so it was really valuable to have the eyewitness story by this priest. I'm very grateful to him for that. We were also lucky to find a lot of archives from Chersonians and from various Chersonian communal services. They shared them with us. Deep gratitude goes to them. I want to mention the archives by Valentina Fedorchuk and her husband Vlad. Valentina is a journalist who was in the city during occupation and who was broadcasting from her kitchen, hiding from the Russians. And she's a remarkable journalist, and she had really rich archives that we used in the film as well. So by combining these footage and also the stories by all the people featured in the film who lived through the flood, and showing the damage that was done to their belongings. For instance, Alona Malirenko, who is a fantastic artist and singer, very, very talented person, she showed us her surviving collection of vyshyvankas, embroidered Ukrainian shirts that belonged to her family for almost a century and were ruined by the flood. So yeah, and speaking of ecocide, uh, there could be the whole different film about that, because right now we're dealing with um, drones flying on fiber optics. And as you can imagine, the fiber optic cables are doing a lot of harm to the environment as well. So, and we're talking about mining, right? And there's a lot of demining going on, but still, the number of mines found in Kherson region still after the occupation is sky high. So yeah, the major environmental damage we have here.
The last topic I wanted to touch upon is the topic of children. And I think this is also one of the incredible moments of your film, how you show us the man who was actually returning Ukrainian children from the captivity, from the Russian captivity across the Dnipro River. But of course, the whole procedure, if I may say, of kidnapping the children is horrible. When the As far as I understand, the parents were forced to give away their children so that the children go to Crimea to improve their health, to the health camps or something like that, but never return back. Can you tell me more about both the story of kidnapping and deporting basically Ukrainian children to Russia or to occupied Crimea, and about these attempts to return them?
Yes, that's a great question, and I feel that we had so much more to say about that, and I had so much more material that could have made it into the film, but of course we were limited with the format. The film can only be that long, and also some of the children in our stories are still in Russian captivity. They're still not found and still not returned, and we had to make a choice not to share these stories in order not to harm. There are other stories like this too, say about partisans and resistance fighters who are currently in Russian prisons, and we cannot share this material yet because that could harm these fighters and it could harm their families. So in the case of the children, there were so many heartbreaking stories, Volodymyr, and there's the stories of an orphanage from which children were kidnapped and stolen, and families with handicapped children, where the whole not an orphanage, but more like a facility where kids with difficult situations and hard, where they need additional help. The families couldn't provide this help at home, and the kids were staying at this facility in Alashki. The whole boarding school, I should call it, the whole boarding school was kidnapped and moved first to Skadovsk, and then these children went in different directions and nobody knows where they are. And I believe my colleagues, a journalist from Suspilny, did a very good story on that, Ivan Antipinka and his colleagues. There's a story in the film. So for those who are interested in the story of kidnapped children, I recommend that Suspilny story. But we limited it just to one family interview, and there's a little charming boy with a Down syndrome. His parents had to hide him throughout the occupation because they were scared that the Russians would come and take him away, as they did in other cases. And as for the rescue operations, yes, this courageous man and some of his colleagues were crossing the river at night in the dark, picking up the children accompanied by the mothers, by their parents at night, and zooming across the river with the Russian snipers still on the other side, risking his life. And I believe he said it was between 200 to 500 kids. I can't remember now, that he was able to help. And he said remarkably that some of the families, on turning back, they were kissing the steps on the stairs, like leading up to the city. And it's a very poignant story. And of course, that's also a part of the whole story of genocide, because we know from the reports that the Russians are running re-education camps, and they are trying to erase a Ukrainian identity. And so we could see this multi-thrown campaign, just the way they are destroying the libraries, the cultural institutions in Kherson, Nikopol, and all around Ukraine. They are doing this with the children that they kidnap, erasing their identity. And this is despicable. And I hope that this war crime, this crime against humanity, is also makes it, across to the global community, just as the human safari, and that eventually these perpetrators are responding for their crimes.
Thank you, Zarina. I will let our listeners to watch the film because there are so many other stories. The story of torture chambers, the story of crematoriums where the Russians were just burning the dead bodies of their own soldiers and maybe of Chersonians. There are so many stories in the film. You can find the film online, khersonhumansafari.com. You will also find the link in the description of this episode. And thank you, Zarina, for all your work for this film and for this conversation.
Thank you, Volodymyr. I just want to add one thing to the audiences because we discussed the most horrifying aspects of life in Kherson, but I focused in the film on also the strengths of Chersonians and the inspiration that they continue to give me. And there are a lot of joyful moments in the film as well. There's music, dance, theater, and it's basically life. So don't be scared. I encourage everyone to see it. That's why we made it free for all, not registration, because our goal is to raise global awareness, put Kherson on the map, and save the city.
Thank you. It's indeed life despite death and love despite pain. Thank you very much, Zarina.
Thank you, Volodymyr.
This was a podcast explaining Ukraine by UkraineWorld, an English language media outlet about Ukraine. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm a Ukrainian philosopher, editor-in-chief of UkraineWorld, and president of PEN Ukraine. My guest today was Zarina Zabrisky, an American filmmaker, author of the film Kherson, Human Safari. Let me remind you that you can support our work on Patreon. Your support is essential as we rely heavily on crowdfunding. You can also help us fund our regular volunteer trips to the frontline areas in Ukraine, including Kherson, where we support both civilians and soldiers. Donations are welcome via PayPal. All links are in the episode description. Thank you for listening. Stay with us and stand with Ukraine.